Let's start with the facts. Increased resource scarcity driving mass migration and war. When societies come under stress, they can either adapt or they can fragment. This is going to mean a lot of violence. Barbed wire on the border, machine guns, surveillance systems, drone strikes. This is the continuation, the logical conclusion of the trends we're on. You can judge this, you can say this is horrible, but what are you going to do when there's 20 million hungry climate refugees knocking on your door? This is kind of the uncomfortable question we have to ask ourselves. Thankfully, I think there's an alternative, and I'd love to tell you about it. Massive campaign of infrastructure building, terraforming, or bringing back the draft. This is a transformation of America's political economy and social contract.
What you're about to watch is a condensed version of a presentation that I gave at the CCCRU. Originally, I uploaded the whole thing, but on reflection, I decided not to. For one thing, the video was like an hour long, so not great for my watch time. More importantly though, the way that I gave the talk was different than the way that I usually communicate on the internet, because I was using a communication style known as meta-irony, which is basically a fancy way of saying, you know, you're interweaving sincerity and irony and hyperbole in a way that is very hard to disentangle, even as the person saying it. I think a lot of us use meta-irony in our everyday speech when we're with friends. It's a fun way to kind of non-committally explore new ideas in a low-stakes environment, but it's a pretty bad way to be on the internet. Especially when you've built your whole brand around being sincere and straightforward and actionable. Because the internet is just like a machine for killing nuance, and a lot of people didn't really understand the message I was trying to communicate. I mean, the original title of the video was "The Leftist Case for Martial Law." Who in their right mind actively wants martial law, much less a leftist? If that's not being provocative, I don't know what is. But then again, I've trained my audience to view what I say sincerely and take what I say at face value. So my bad. Now, I don't want to use irony as a shield and act like the whole thing was a joke. On the contrary, I actually think there were a lot of interesting and thought-provoking ideas in the presentation that I think are worth exploring in a sincere manner. And that's precisely why I made this video. With that long retention-killing preamble out of the way, let's get into it.
Let's start with the facts. These are all from NASA, so you know it's totally fake. Planet's surface temperature has risen about 1 degree Celsius, that's 2 degrees Fahrenheit, since the late 1800s. And since the Industrial Revolution has began, ocean acidity has increased about 30%.
I think we all kind of know on a logical level that the climate is changing rapidly, but I think that the human mind finds it hard to comprehend the true nature of an exponential curve. There are planetary boundaries that we are on the threshold of crossing. And if we cross them, they're going to lead to a rapid destabilization of the climate. Just sit with that for a minute. You will live to see this.
Okay, so what does all this mean for us? As you can imagine, it's not great. Less predictable weather means less predictable crop yields, more food insecurity, more droughts, more famines, more and deadlier natural disasters, coastal areas under threat of flooding. Most humans live along coastlines, in fact. So if you didn't know. So that's not great either. The bottom line here, increased resource scarcity driving mass migration and war. So a lot of fun stuff coming down the pike.
But the aspect of this that interests me most is not necessarily the ecological aspect, but the social aspect.
So all of this is just kind of a long way of teeing us up for what we're facing now, which is a collision course. Our infrastructure, our governance systems, our cultures, our economies, our supply chains, they were all conceived of in a pre-climate change world. We're not prepared for these eventualities. We are out of sync with the reality that we're in because our institutions are lagging behind. They're not designed to accommodate this development. So, you know, when societies come under stress, they can either adapt and change as a result, or they can fragment.
In short, our institutions are just not equipped to handle this crisis. And everyone kind of senses this intuitively, whether you're conservative or a leftist. Tinkering around the edges, these liberal emissions trading schemes, I mean, I'm sure that they're okay, you know? I mean, a lot of this policy is probably sound. It's just an order of magnitude less than we need. And the crazy thing about it is that these are all just proposals. We needed all this stuff 40 years ago, and we're still only just talking about it. They're not even rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. They're having an international summit to discuss setting up a working group to maybe think about rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. It's crazy. So like in a weird way, I almost have more respect for the conservatives who are just like, yeah, that's fake. I'm gonna keep living my life. Because at least they're honest, right? Like they know that within the current system, we're not gonna do anything. The point is, we're in a situation now where we're gonna have increased resource scarcity, and that's butting up against a capitalist system which is continuing to accumulate profits in the hands of fewer and fewer people. Wealth and resources are continuing to concentrate, while the availability of actual material resources is decreasing. So the gap is going to be widening. Broadly, there are kind of two ways that we can go. We can maintain this system of inequality, and that's going to require increasing levels of violence. Or we can disrupt this system and create a new one that actually allows us to redistribute things and to ensure that the people who make things in the economy see the benefits from that.
It would behoove us to ask, what form will this adaptation or this fracturing take? How are our societies going to evolve, change, or fracture as a result of climate change? Now, it wouldn't be a lecture from a pretentious pseudo-intellectual leftist without a Zizek quote. So here's our daily dose. Zizek points out in one of his pieces in Jacobin that the French have two words for future. There's futur and avenir. Futur stands for the future as the continuation of the present, as the full actualization of the tendencies which are already present, while avenir points towards a radical break, a discontinuity with the present. Avenir is what is to come, not just what will be. I think that's important to think about. Anybody can trend cast, anybody can extrapolate what's going to happen from what is happening. But the future, by definition, is what's novel, it's what's unexpected, it's what's new. This is the antinomy that we have to consider, the opposing forces that are going to define the future. And because of that, I think there's two sort of strands or like trends or clusters of social orders that I believe are going to evolve as a result of the pressure from climate change. Those being eco-fascism and eco-socialism, broadly construed. So on one hand, we have eco-fascism. The logical conclusion of our present order taken to its extreme. Or on the other hand, we have eco-socialism. Boo! This is the radical break. This is what happens if we evolve.
Continued free market capitalism, expansion and accumulation of capital is incompatible with democracy. And that contradiction is sharpening as climate change accelerates.
If we consider the way that the logic of the capitalist system, you need to create more profits. You need to increase the rate at which you're making profit even. Like just having a business that's profitable is not enough. Profits must grow and it must compound. So if you're doing that in a situation with increased scarcity, one of the ways that capitalists have always made profit is by cutting costs, by cutting labor costs. And so that's why capitalism is able to generate, on one hand, tremendous wealth, but on the other hand, always create extreme levels of inequality. And to the extent that that inequality has been mitigated is because we're beneficiaries of a 20th century social democratic project, which could redistribute some of the gains of that and buy off some of the workers with the amount of profit that the capitalists are making. But most workers throughout history and even now in the contemporary world live in sort of abject poverty. What this is going to mean, and I said this in kind of the last point, is within and between states, we're going to be putting up walls, we're going to be putting up barriers. I expect to see like gated cities within the next 20 years, as sort of there's an indrawing and this a layering of protection around capital and around assets. It's just these sort of like gated special economic zones. You can judge this, you can say this is horrible, but like, what are you going to do when there's 20 million hungry climate refugees knocking on your door? I mean, and at that point, this sort of barbarism that is coming, I think it will seem inevitable, because by that time it will have been inevitable. It will have been made inevitable because of our inaction. This is going to mean a lot of violence. It's going to mean barbed wire on the border. It's going to mean machine guns and surveillance systems and drone strikes.
So, if capitalism and democracy are incompatible, then there's only two ways to square this circle. You can either bypass capitalism or you can bypass democracy. I really do think the choice now that we are facing more than ever is socialism or barbarism. Now, if you're on my channel, I would hope that you are invested in preventing eco-fascism from coming about. The problem is, if you extrapolate the logic of our system, eco-fascism is kind of inevitable, which means that we need to intervene in history and change course. That's what politics is. It's an intervention into history.
Thankfully, I think there's an alternative, and I'd love to tell you about it. Essentially, what we're facing is a collective action problem, because there's no evil kind of like hand that is going to be in control of the eco-fascist agenda. There's never going to be an eco-fascist party. It will purely emerge out of necessity, out of the incentives of the system. We have to make money. We have to wring ever more out of this dying planet. So what we need is something that can override and supersede markets when it is socially necessary. And this means creating dual power. It means doing more than just redistributing profits.
If we're serious about averting eco-fascism, then we need to reckon with the idea that this is going to require a massive mobilization, the likes of which we've never seen before. And the free market system that we have right now is sort of incompatible with that.
Massive campaign of infrastructure building, terraforming, and sort of remolding the climate. And the capitalist economy is not really capable of doing this because, number one, the profit motive isn't there, but number two, there's no corporation that is individually large enough to manage this.
To make a long story short, we are going to need a lot of institutional muscle to pull this off. So it would be to our benefit to think about how this eco-socialist transition is going to come about. Is it going to be labor unions? Is it going to be like electoral reform? Is it going to be the Vanguard Party model of the 20th century? Is it going to be this sort of anarchist new left model of just spontaneous protest and leaderless movements that mobilize millions of people out into the streets? Honestly, I think all of these models have their own strengths and weaknesses, and probably it's going to be some combination of all these forces that could turn the tide. I'm thinking specifically about the book If We Burn by Vincent Bevins. This is a kind of a study of the 2010s and the decade of mass protests, Occupy Wall Street and the Arab Spring. Bevins is kind of studying where those movements were successful and where they weren't and asking, why was that? And one of the conclusions that Bevins draws is that the successful movements, the ones that were able to transform their societies in a positive democratic way, were the ones that were able to kind of link up this spontaneous mass movements with organized labor unions, parties, etc., that were able to channel that energy into productive ends and kind of were able to serve as leadership and guidance for these movements. Here's where the presentation gets interesting. I recently read a very provocative, interesting proposal from leftist critic Frederick Jameson. In his book, An American Utopia, Jameson focuses on one institution that leftists hardly ever consider: the military. Now, it totally makes sense why leftists wouldn't typically think of the military as a vector for revolution. Any cursory study of the 20th century will reveal that the military has been involved in a number of foreign coups, less than savory actions at home and abroad. And in a more general sense, the institution of the military is often the last line of defense for the ruling class of any system. And yet, there are a couple reasons that I think the military is worth thinking about. The first reason is a practical one, and I'm speaking in the US context here primarily. Civilian government is essentially being gutted. It's losing both capacity and legitimacy, the ability to do things and the trust of the public, and these things are kind of linked. If citizens don't believe the government can actually make their lives better, then they just kind of want the government to get out of their way. And this is kind of the Reaganite philosophy taken to its absolute extreme with things like Doge. And that's bad news, especially when you're in a situation where natural disasters and crises are becoming more and more common. We saw this in the early 2000s with Hurricane Katrina. The government ended up having to call in the military to deal with that. If we're in a situation where there's a Katrina-level disaster, every 5 years or every year, we're going to see a lot more power be handed over to the military because there's increasing level of crises, but the capacity of the civilian state to deal with those crises is in decline. So it definitely makes sense for leftists to pay attention to the military, because if the military increasingly is the center of power rather than civilian democratic government, then that means the military is also the site for political conflict and transformation within society. None of this is desirable, but it seems to be where things are headed.
The military essentially constitutes like a state within a state. It has some autonomy from federal control. It's able to transcend the Constitution without destroying it.
The second reason that I think leftists should be paying attention to the military is that the military has a lot of the raw materials that would be useful in creating an eco-socialist society. For example, the military has lots of capacity, lots of ability to do things.
The military can do things in a way that much of the state cannot anymore.
The military also has a lot of institutional legitimacy and trust attached to it. Obviously, not among leftists, but in the wider public, absolutely.
People hate their congressperson, they hate Congress, they hate government, they hate the media, don't trust the media, they hate big tech, they hate big banks, they hate the woke universities, they don't trust labor unions, but the military has largely maintained its legitimacy.
Also, the military is just objectively one of the most diverse and meritocratic institutions that remains in American life. And it's very funny to say that, but it is true.
Only the military, I believe, has the collective spirit which could serve as the foundation of a socialist culture.
So to make a long story short, the military may be one of the only institutional forms currently existing that has the muscle and the structure to survive the climate crisis and kind of reshape society. The question is, could such an institution be transformed? And if so, how? And the answer really is, I'm not sure. These questions are impossible to answer definitively ahead of time. But there are historical precedents. For one, the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia was heavily assisted by Russian troops who had fought in World War I and then were revolting against their government. Another great example is the Carnation Revolution in Portugal, which overthrew sort of a fascist dictatorship through the armed forces. History seems to suggest that in a situation where elites come to rely heavily on the military, then those systems are vulnerable to pressure and discontent which comes from within the military itself. It's worth noting that both of those examples that I just brought up happened in the context where there was also intense civilian organizing. And in any sort of transformation of society, that organizing will likely take center stage. In the last part of this video, I think it would be fun to think about what an eco-socialist society might actually look like. And if we do manage to transform the army from a military force into Jameson's conception of a more universal army, then I think there might actually be a lot of positive social developments and a lot of new interesting formations that could result from this. The first of which being what I would call the Civilian Climate Corps.
So what the Civilian Climate Corps is going to do, we got two prongs here. We got biosphere management and national reconstruction. So we need to take a lot of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. We need to rebuild ecosystem complexity. And we're going to do that through genetically engineering wildlife and crops, developing new agricultural methods. We were talking the other night about food forests and sort of this permacultural technique where we need to reinvent old things, bring them back, these old methods, and just change the way that we produce food. Essentially, we need to terraform Earth. We need to change ecosystems to suit us, and we need to develop new species to fill new niches and refill old niches. And then we're going to need to develop a whole new host of technologies to sort of manage and track our ecosystems, complex computer systems to model ecosystem development. We're already terraforming the Earth. We're just doing a bad job at it. We're releasing tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. Genie's out of the bottle, as they say. Pandora's box has already been opened, so we need to claim our power and manage it. National reconstruction. We need to harden our infrastructure against extreme weather. We need to build affordable housing, hospitals, seawalls, dams, infrastructure, nuclear power plants. We need to crack nuclear fusion, create public transit, retrofit our cities to be more ecologically sustainable, and we need to do pharmaceutical research, develop new technologies, new medical technologies to aid in that. Again, we need to marshal a large segment of the population for this task.
Now, I mentioned earlier that addressing climate change is going to require a mass mobilization of people in a way that market forces are really not able to do. One of the ways that I think this mobilization could be accomplished is through a national service program, where young people are required to spend a certain amount of time kind of, fighting the climate crisis, as it were.
One of the worst parts about the modern world is that we don't have any rites of passage anymore. In every pre-modern society, there's an initiation ritual whereby children become adults. They become members of the tribe. They're initiated into a project. And we don't have that anymore. Maybe college, the college experience, this poor way to become initiated into adulthood. It teaches you all the wrong things. So instead, we're sending them out to the forest to work. Plant some trees, build some housing, buddy. I think there's a lot of disillusioned Zoomers just kind of living this kind of lifestyle. If you're lucky, you're rotting away in a cubicle. This is not life. This is not what life is meant to be. I don't think Gen Z is lazy. I think people always probably have thought that you're lazy or an underachiever, but I don't think that's true. I think Gen Z doesn't lack work ethic. It lacks purpose. It lacks meaning. It lacks a project to apply itself to. Within the Civilian Climate Corps, a young Wojak such as the man portrayed on the screen would have the opportunity to apply him or herself to a task that transcends them for once. You'd be outside, you'd be working with other people your age, you'd be in community, you'd be learning valuable skills, you'd have something that you could feel proud of yourself for. You'd be part of something greater than yourself. And you know, where would you rather meet your wife? On Tinder? In the club? Or in the hills of Wyoming, testing out a new strain of drought-resistant pine? And at night, in the cool air, you sneak out of the camp and you go up on the hillside and you look up and you see so many stars, more stars than you've ever seen. And because of the new retrofitting of lights in the city, they're so clear, it's like you can almost reach out and touch them. And as you look up, a comet streaks across the sky, and you turn and you lock eyes with Shadi. It's beautiful.
I also think the Civilian Climate Corps could provide an interesting solution to the immigration crisis by offering a pathway to citizenship for people who want to come to America and contribute to, again, the effort of fighting climate change.
If you want to become a citizen, you serve in the Civilian Climate Corps. That's how you become an American, is by doing what Americans do, which is build the nation.
One other idea I have is the idea of like paleo zones or primitive zones. One of the drivers of climate change and ecological crisis is just human expansion into wild lands. And so in order to address the climate crisis, we're going to need to rewild a significant chunk of the planet's surface. I mean, some estimates say like up to half of the Earth needs to be turned back into wilderness, essentially. This is just a thought. What if we didn't just rewild the land, but also people? What if there were these like paleo zones where you could go live at like a Stone Age tech level and kind of be stewards of the land? And by convergent evolution, I imagine that these social systems would kind of come to resemble the indigenous systems that originally lived on this land. Honestly, I think there are just some people who are not gonna like modernity. And so if they want to go live a traditional lifestyle, they can go do that.
Let's say that the year is 2100 and we've built a strong, vigorous culture. We've created a society where everyone's needs are met. We've mastered the skill of ecosystem design and infrastructural mega projects. We've harnessed supercomputers and AI systems to create a new type of economy that is in some way democratic. What excites me about this proposition the most is that it would not only materially improve the lives of people in America and ideally around the world, but it would also give us purpose as a nation. It would allow us to not just survive the climate crisis, but to truly thrive and to advance humanity. It would give us the skills to prepare for our crowning achievement as a species, which I believe to be space exploration. And not just space exploration, space colonization. I mean, this is our horizon, this is the final frontier. And we would have the skills to do it. We can understand this task scientifically. We could speak about it in terms of evolution. We could say that our ecological niche is to be a bridge species, because we're the only species that is capable of bringing the flame of life across the cold, dead chasm of space. We're the only ones who can make the universe safe for habitation. If you want to think about it spiritually, you could say that we have a sacred duty to spread life throughout the universe. This task is a profoundly modern task. A lot of people want to look for meaning in the past. They want to return to tradition, as you say. This, I think, presents a way forward for us to channel our productive energies, not just in sort of the raw economic sense that sees people as widgets to be moved by some central planner, but actually like a profound spiritual meaning and a task of rebuilding not just a nation, not just a culture, but rebuilding purpose within modernity.
Okay, let's bring this down to land. This is not my ideal state of the world. It's just kind of my thinking on where things are headed and where we might be able to intervene to stop absolute catastrophe. I'm not proposing utopia, I'm proposing survival. You don't have to agree with me. I'm not sure I even agree with myself. But I think the climate crisis demands that we be inventive and that we draw from a variety of sources that may seem eclectic or contradictory. If you think these ideas are stimulating and you want to continue discussing them in a long-form group setting with me and some of my friends, you should join Vanguard Academy. I'll also be posting the unabridged original footage of the talk there. Link in the description. Until next time, a better world is possible.